I recently came across this soundbite between Sean Puri and Alex Hormozi just a few weeks ago, and it really made me think.
You said you're geeking out on AI. Anything like what's it? You using it a ton? What do you use it for?
Yeah, I
Anything
use it a lot. I use it. I mean, I just say I'm ashamed. I use it all the time, and I am ashamed at my use cases. I know I should be using it better, which I think many people feel that way. But I feel like at all levels, everyone feels like they should be using it more. But
there should be a word for like AI guilt.
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
I have this like overwhelming sense of AI guilt.
Yeah, I think Elon has AI guilt. You know what I mean? So.
And after watching that small snippet, it made me realize that a lot of folks, including maybe you, are suffering from that eloquently labeled problem. AI guilt is that feeling of either not using AI enough, using it wrong, or just not using it at all and falling behind. And I can say that after working with hundreds of businesses with my team, we've seen this pattern almost everywhere in every single industry. So in this video, I'm gonna walk you through the concept and much more importantly, what you can do to get rid of AI guilt. Because the thing is, AI is not gonna slow down. Maybe we'll have some models plateau, but almost every single week there will be a brand new update, a brand new raising of money for a mega corporation, a brand new tool, and you'll have all the distractions in the world. So that part won't stop. But what you'll be able to do is differentiate and say, you know what, I have tuned out from AI for a month and I'm okay with that. And in this video, I'm gonna help you get to that mindset. So in a nutshell, this really summarizes AI guilt in an image. So being concerned that everyone else is using AI and you're not, whether you're doing it as an individual, as a small team, as a company, or even an enterprise or corporation. And the next part might be saying, I might be productive, but I could be possibly way more productive, possibly superhuman if I basically immersed myself in every single thing that is AI. And the third one, naturally, is part of that latter, which is I'm missing opportunities. And this is where FOMO, or fear of missing out, kicks in. And then finally, you might give up and say, you know what, I'm just gonna become obsolete. I can't keep up with this. I'm getting emails from 7 newsletters, 6 free communities, 2 paid communities, and I can't take it anymore. And while sometimes it might be tempting to become this gentleman here and wave the white flag, there is a better way. So realistically, there are multiple ways that you can get around this, but one of them that I find to be a lot more powerful and easier to implement is just shifting your mentality from I'm behind to I'm not behind, I'm selective. But if you watch the very first video of this 30-day marathon, you would have seen the entire landscape in a nutshell, from voice to prompt engineering to models to tools to automation platforms. And the real goal, the way you win, is you are very selective, saying, I am in the real estate industry. I care about lead generation. So anything related to lead generation, whether that be automation, a AI wrapper tool that helps me do it better, if you're focused on that lens where you have a specific problem, ideally it's a revenue generating problem if you are a business, then you just zero in on that. And anything that is not within that sector, so if Nano Banana 5 comes out, this model that lets you edit videos or pictures really well, and it's amazing, it now destroys Photoshop on every level, you still shouldn't care unless it's adjusting, let's say in the real estate example, the listing pictures and making them look nicer and fancier and adding a cushion or a couch where it didn't actually exist before. That might make sense. But if you just make the AI space work for you, where you can just ask, okay, this new thing came out. Does it in any way contribute to my goal in my industry, in my niche? If the answer is no, then simply you just don't have to care. But I'm sure even hearing that, many of you watching right now might be saying, you are just being an idealist, you're being an optimist. It's way easier said than done, which I know in many cases I agree, because we do live in FOMO land, where if you just go on LinkedIn or Twitter or X, or go to work with your boss or your colleague, you'll have all of these different headlines, which is where LinkedIn is one of the biggest offenders of this, where you'll see all kinds of statuses, typically with M-dashes and AI-generated slop, saying, AI saved me 15 hours. I replaced my entire team that didn't exist before with AI. Even though realistically, the automation breaks every second day, it is not foolproof, it won't scale, and they barely had a team to automate to begin with. And then when you move on to X, you'll see some status that says, if you're not embracing AI, someone that is embracing AI will replace you. And then a bunch of people debate that AI will take over everything, or humans will always be in the loop, and it's this endless debate that derives zero value whatsoever. And then the last two are pretty self-explanatory, where you could be working in a company or a startup, or a big enterprise, and your boss feels the need to make the face noise of saying, we need to use AI because it's a very socially acceptable statement to make now in 2025. And the last one is a very common one you'll see on YouTube, to be frank, where you'll see someone raise their hands behind their head and say, ChatGPT does all my work so I can sit on the beach and do nothing. But realistically, the task is being done very mediocrely. It sounds like AI generated stuff, and it's not actually moving the needle forward. But wait, there's more. There are many cases where a team decides, you know what, we hear this word agent all the time. We're going to say that we need agents, even though they need processes, they need infrastructure, they need proper data, they need proper data practices. But because it's so accepted to say that you need agents, that the future is agents, and you're going to have 250 agents doing all your work, even though as you add every new agent, as long as they're using language models, you're basically adding the likelihood of hallucination every single time you stack on a new agent, for the most part. This becomes a recipe for disaster. And then we become overwhelmed. And then, like I said, what you actually need in most cases, again, it doesn't matter if you're an individual, if you're a business owner, if you're both, if you're an entrepreneur, you need a plan, you need a good data, you need good systems, and you need SOPs. And in many cases, a lot of people want to jump to using AI, but you don't even deserve to use AI because you haven't even done the basic things right to deserve to have the proper foundation to then add the cherry on top, which is generative AI. So you basically have the equivalent of a team here laughing and smiling, saying, you know what, I love ChatGPT or I love Claude, it helps me so much. But underneath the surface, you have broken workflows that don't scale, a lack of understanding of whether to use make, N.E.E.D.S, neither, custom code, and a lot of things that you won't see on YouTube is a lot of these companies don't have an Airtable. They don't have really pretty software like HubSpot that you can integrate with in and out. They are more on the monolith side, where they have a system from the 1990s or the early 2000s, which barely has an API, let alone the ability to actually hook up to it. And I would say this video is pretty timely because just a few weeks ago, MIT came out with a study that said that 95% of investments in generative AI have produced 0 returns. Now, the one thing that's a bit vague here is what qualifies a return. Some returns are not necessarily tangible on the bottom line. There could be some intangible stuff, but let's say we're focusing on the tangible. It's saying 95%. Now, could that be a bit hyperbolized for the headlines? Possibly. But from what we've seen from doing tons of consultations, and like I said in the first video, I spent almost 2,000 hours myself speaking to business owners across different industries. And a lot are very excited about the benefits of using generative AI, but they're not excited about what it takes to actually deserve to yield those benefits using this type of technology. And this point specifically right here really dials in on the issue, which is there's high adoption. So everyone could be using ChatGPT, but they're not actually using it to even 80% of its full potential. So now I've made a lot of face noise myself in talking about the problem, but let's talk about the solution and how we can evolve our mind from not feeling guilty or feeling the need that you need your own personal coach to tell you what happened last week in AI, because realistically, it most likely doesn't matter unless there's some really tangible step change that fundamentally changes the way you approach using something or changes your process entirely. So one of the multiple solutions to this problem of AI guilt is becoming fluent, not familiar. And this comes with a little bit of a story. So growing up, I didn't think I was very good at math because I was actually very artistic when I was a kid. I loved painting, making sculptures. I used to compete in art contests, but my parents weren't a big fan of those hobbies. So at that point in time, I still didn't care too much for the math because I didn't have anything to use the math for until I ended up eventually doing stats and machine learning, and then I loved math. But up until then, I started doing all these courses, learning different languages. So the first resume I ever submitted for a job, I had all of these languages here where I said I had basic experience with. And I thought that I was an absolute prodigy, a genius for saying that I was so good at being mediocre at all of these languages. Actually, not even mediocre, starter level, like literally beginner. And this is what a lot of you are doing right now in the AI space, where you say that, oh yeah, I know N.E.E.D.S. Oh yeah, I know make.com. Oh, I've used GenSpark. Oh, I know what RAG is. But realistically, if you actually pushed yourself a little bit and went a step deeper from the surface, you probably don't know that much, or you haven't gone that deep, or you haven't actually pushed yourself or your team to a point where you're genuinely a jack of all trades here, let alone a master of any of them. So one way to really rid yourself of the guilt is becoming an expert in at least one of these. Because becoming an expert in practically any of these on screen right now would allow you to go deeper on multiple other skills. So let's take an example here like N.E.E.D.S. So to become good at N.E.E.D.S or proficient at N.E.E.D.S, you have to become used to the different nodes, kind of like puzzles in a board game, knowing what each of the different nodes can do, especially the essential ones. You have to be somewhat cognizant of what language models do, so you know which one you can pick. You have to know how to do prompt engineering, especially if you want to use AI agent nodes, which people love using in N.E.E.D.S. You have to know how to not only attach tools, but make something like an HTTP request where you connect to a backend service and you understand the concept of an API key or an endpoint. So there's all of these micro skills that go into actually becoming good at any one of these 10 things on screen, let alone all of them. And if we take a more tactical example, let's say we wanted to just master ChatGPT, which a lot of companies hire myself and my team to go in, do a big workshop for all the employees to understand not just how to write a prompt, but use it to 100%. So it gets everyone really into the world of generative AI. Well, in ChatGPT, you can do the following, right? So if you want to start mastering ChatGPT, you want to first understand prompt engineering, which most people still don't understand how language models work, that it's not magic, that your output is only as good as your input. And this alone could take a couple weeks to become decent at, let alone expert, which would take honestly 6 to 12 months. And even myself, who's done NLP in a master's degree before and have used this for years, I wouldn't even say that I'm a top 10% user. I always think that I have something more to learn. So if that's me, then you can't just say you did a course for 3 to 4 weeks and now you are an expert at prompt engineering. And taking that example, if you finish prompting text, then you'd want to maybe understand how to prompt images, maybe using the GPT models. And then how you want to create ChatGPT projects. And what's the difference between a ChatGPT project and a custom GPT? What are the pros? What are the cons? And if you want to go down the custom GPT route, right, how do you make an advanced custom GPT where you can hook up what's called a custom schema, which is basically a way to hook up your custom GPT to an API. So if you want to connect it to an external service or an end-to-end workflow, then you can. And if we keep going, we go to understanding what is a custom schema, how to create it, what's involved in doing that, which could also take you a few days to understand, exploring all the different models, which obviously GPT-5 now has muddied the waters, where we have some legacy models still existing and some fast, low, medium, high thinking models as well. How to use memory and leverage it properly, how to use knowledge bases in custom GPTs, what are the limitations of those knowledge bases in the custom GPTs? Are they actual RAG or are they more scanning at surface level, right? So, and you can keep going to advanced knowledge base usage until you get to the point where you can say, okay, I'm now intermediate or really proficient with ChatGPT. And this is the kind of depth that most folks are missing from understanding that if you want to become a generalist, a solid generalist in the space, and not feel guilty about not knowing how to use this new tool from, I don't know, Canva AI, and that you haven't mastered it because it just came out, it doesn't matter. You don't need to master it. You just need to master something, because it's kind of like learning math. And once I started loving math in university, in my master's, I understood that once you understand enough math, or you've gone through enough math, any new type of math is easier to learn. So you just have to master something. And then once you master something, it becomes really quick to understand something else. And last but not least, I'm just going to focus on this one concept here, basically a framework to help you understand, or at least go through a checklist of understanding whether or not you should be guilty or not of using AI in a particular situation. And the goal again is to build something and use AI because it's needed, or it's really helpful, or it helps you skip a few steps, versus trying to force using AI in a situation that doesn't actually warrant it to begin with. And you realize this a lot, especially on the implementation side, where there have been probably dozens of projects where we go to the finish line with the client, and then they realize that they have so many iterations they want to make to the language model output, or they want to constrain it so deeply that there was technically no point of using language models or generative AI to begin with, because the whole concept of using GenAI is you have an agent or agents of chaos, meaning there is some variability, there's some creativity, there's some unpredictability in using this technology. So if you're applying it to a use case that has zero flexibility for chaos or for nuance or for hallucinations, you can't necessarily make generative AI be always deterministic. It's not a deterministic technology. If you want to go down to determinism, then you want to use something more like a standard workflow or standard Python or standard coding, something that you can always predict the output given that your input is always the same. So I can refer to this framework as the N.E.E.D.S framework. So number one, Is this solving a real problem, whatever you're trying to solve to begin with? Numero dos is evaluate alternatives. If you did nothing to solve this problem, especially not using AI, would anything happen? Let's say it's a business scenario. Would you lose any form of money on the table? Would you lose ROI? Next thing here is experimenting. I find a lot of people talking about 6 months to 12 months to 2 years before you've even created a pilot to see whether or not this has legs, whether your idea has legs. And I find that a lot in the vibe coding space, where people are building SaaS, and a lot of YouTubers will say, I built $1 million SaaS, but they neither sold it for $1 million, nor do they have any active users. And if they had active users, they understand the whole security vulnerability aspect comes into play, because it's really easy to compromise those kinds of applications. But taking that same example, if you took that vibe coding app and you just made it into a fully functional mockup, and you went and tested it with 5, 10, 25, 50 users to get feedback that this thing has legs, that's where maybe it's really worth investing in, because you now have market validation that this thing has an actual future. And if you realize that there might not be an actual future, that's where this comes in, which is delay when uncertain. That's the D of needs. So strategic patience versus FOMO. A lot of times I've gotten on calls, even though it's in my company's best interest to sell someone on a development solution, that I say, I think that this problem you're trying to solve will be fixed naturally in the next 6 to 12 months if you're willing to wait. So we could either start now and we'll charge you probably anywhere between 80 to 160 to $500,000 for development, but by the time we're there and it's ready to go, you might have been able to make it for a fraction of that cost. So are you sure you want to make this investment now? Because the undercurrents of this technology seem to be pointing that this will actually solve itself. So from an investment standpoint, you want to be aware of that option on the table, because if the problem you're trying to solve will be solved already for free or for a very negligible amount, then it's worth waiting. And the last part here will really help you dial in any of your decisions, which is just asking, does solving X using AI or generative AI actually help your goals to begin with? If the answer is yes, then maybe you want to proceed with that pilot and test the waters out. And just to drive the point home, so if you take N.E.E.D.S assessment, so this is if you want to identify if you have a real measurable problem. So processing 500 invoices that takes 20 hours weekly. Very tangible goal you're trying to dial down, which in this case is a very meritorious goal. It's not a great use of time to do the same thing over and over again. So that's why I'm a big advocate of AI and automation where it makes sense. On the evaluation side, you want to list out all possible solutions, not just doing nothing, but also hiring someone or using non-AI tools. So a really good example of this are voice agents. So if you're pitching that a voice agent will replace a full-time employee, that's a hard sell. Because while maybe it can do 80% or handle 80% of the calls day to day, what if 1 or 3 of those calls were revenue generating opportunities versus when are you open, or what do you guys do as a service, or how can I contact you? And the AI messes up on that 20%, right? And imagine that is the driving factor for revenue in that particular business where the voice agent lives. Then in that case, maybe you saved on the $4,000 employee, but you missed out on the opportunity cost of maybe thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands. Now, are there ways around this where you say, you know what, we want to use AI, we want to use a voice agent, but you know what, we'll do it after hours, where we weren't generating revenue to begin with. So whether or not it closes is not a big deal, because anything that we get is a value add or it's a surplus, and we weren't planning on doing an offshore call center to begin with. And like I said, on the experimentation side, you want to experiment before you commit. I think everything in GenAI should always be an MVP or a pilot or a minimal lovable product where it's almost there to the point where you're ready to put real money behind it. But you want to test and test, because things are changing so fast that what you think is valuable today, or what a user will think is valuable today, might change with just one big breakthrough in the space. And when it comes to the delay when uncertain, a really good example is back in the 2008 crisis, where a bunch of startups emerged like Airbnb and Uber, and a lot of these really successful companies weren't actually first in their space with their business idea. They went second or third after seeing a business idea like theirs. A lot of them were second or third and not first movers, and they got to witness the first movers suffer and go through the growing pains and constraints, and they just waited for that to happen, and then they entered the market. You can take that exact same approach using and implementing generative AI, and that way you have no guilt. If anything, you have relief. And lastly, like I said, if you are a business owner or an entrepreneur or an enterprise, asking yourself, Is this something that if it took multiple years to perfect, would that still be worth it for you? Or are you trying to make it sound like it's worth it to justify saying that you are an AI first company, which I understand is important in this economic climate right now, but it's much more important that you're grounded in everything that you do. And that's pretty much it. So hopefully this helps you dispel and actually put a label on this feeling of AI guilt, and more importantly, gives you a way to manage it. If you found this insightful, let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoy conversations just like these, I do this pretty much every day, every week in my early AI adopters community. So if that's of interest for you, feel free to hop in, the water's warm, and maybe I'll see you inside. I'll see you in the next one.